They laughed. When he applied for the job, he was clearly unqualified for. But what he did during the interview left the CEO offering him a position no one else even knew existed. Marcus Thompson stood outside the gleaming 40-story headquarters of Quantum Dynamics Corporation, clutching a folder containing his resume and knowing he was about to walk into the most humiliating experience of his life. The job posting had been for senior software architect. Minimum requirements included a computer science degree, 10 years of experience, and expertise in multiple programming languages. Marcus had none of these qualifications. What he did have was 3 months until his unemployment benefits ran out, a disabled younger sister who needed expensive medical care, and the desperate knowledge that this company paid more than any other tech firm in the city. So when his friend Jake mentioned the opening during their weekly coffee meetup, Marcus had made a decision that everyone, including himself, knew was completely insane. "You're applying for what?" Jake had nearly choked on his latte. "Marcus, you drive for a delivery service. You barely know how to use Excel." But Marcus had already made up his mind. 24 hours later, he'd submitted his application through the company website, knowing it would probably get filtered out by automated systems before any human even saw it. Somehow, miraculously, he'd received an email 3 days later scheduling him for an interview. The night before the interview, Marcus had sat at his kitchen table with Emma, his 22-year-old sister, helping her with physical therapy exercises. Emma had been born with spina bifida, and her condition had worsened over the years. The experimental surgery that could help her regain significant mobility cost $180,000, money they simply didn't have, even with insurance. "You know this is crazy, right?" Emma had said, adjusting her position in her wheelchair. "These tech companies, they're not going to hire someone like you. Someone like me? You know what I mean. No college degree, no connections, no experience in their world." She'd reached over and squeezed his hand. "I love you for trying, but I don't want you to get your hopes up." Marcus had looked around their small apartment, the medical equipment taking up half the living room, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, the photos of Emma before her condition deteriorated, when she could still walk with just a cane. What if I don't try? What if I just accept that this is as good as it gets? Then we figure out another way. We always do. But Marcus was tired of figuring out another way. He was tired of working 3 part-time jobs that barely covered their expenses. He was tired of watching his brilliant sister, who'd been accepted to MIT before her health declined, waste her potential because they couldn't afford the surgery that might give her independence. Now, standing in the marble lobby surrounded by men and women in expensive suits carrying leather portfolios, Marcus felt completely out of place in his thrift store blazer and scuffed shoes. The receptionist, a polished young woman with perfectly styled hair, looked him up and down with barely concealed skepticism when he announced his appointment. "Marcus Thompson for the senior software architect position?" she repeated, as if the words didn't quite compute. "Are you sure you have the right company?" "Pretty sure," Marcus replied, trying to project more confidence than he felt. She made a phone call, spoke in hushed tones, then hung up with a puzzled expression. "Please take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Marcus spent the next 20 minutes watching other candidates arrive. They all looked the part. Confident, educated, carrying the latest tablets and smartphones. One candidate, a young man with horn-rimmed glasses and a designer suit, was reviewing what appeared to be a complex technical presentation on his laptop. Another, a woman in her 30s, was on a phone call discussing scalable microservices architecture with the casual fluency of someone who lived and breathed technology. A few glanced in his direction with confusion, as if wondering whether he was lost or perhaps there to deliver something. Marcus overheard snippets of conversation that might as well have been in a foreign language. Kubernetes deployment strategies, machine learning optimization, blockchain integration protocols. He began to seriously question his sanity. What was he doing here? These people weren't just qualified. They were operating on an entirely different level. His delivery job had taught him efficiency and problem-solving, but nothing that would translate to designing software systems for a billion-dollar corporation. "Mr. Thompson?" A woman in her 30s appeared, wearing a sharp business suit and an expression of professional politeness that didn't quite hide her bewilderment. "I'm Sarah Chen, HR director. If you'll follow me?" They rode the elevator to the 32nd floor in silence. Marcus could feel Sarah stealing glances at him, probably trying to figure out how he'd made it this far in the process. The interview room was intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive conference table, and 3 people already seated waiting for him. "Marcus Thompson," Sarah announced. "Meet our interview panel. David Kumar, head of software development, Jennifer Walsh, senior technical architect, and..." She paused, as if still processing this herself. "Robert Sterling, our CEO, who requested to sit in on this interview personally." Marcus's heart nearly stopped. The CEO? This was definitely not standard procedure for a software architect position. Robert Sterling was legendary in the tech world, a brilliant entrepreneur who'd built Quantum Dynamics from a small startup into a multi-billion-dollar corporation, known for innovative solutions to impossible problems. Sterling was younger than Marcus had expected, maybe early 40s with intense green eyes and graying hair. He studied Marcus with the same curiosity a scientist might show when examining an unusual specimen. "Please sit," Sterling said, gesturing to the chair across from them. "I have to admit, Mr. Thompson, your application was unique." David Kumar opened a folder and glanced at its contents with obvious confusion. "So, Marcus, may I call you Marcus?" I see here that your most recent employment was with City Express Delivery Service for 3 years. Before that, you worked at a hardware store, and before that, various retail positions. He looked up. No computer science background, no programming experience, no technical certifications. Help me understand why you applied for a senior software architect position. Marcus had practiced this moment in his head 100 times, but sitting here under the scrutiny of these brilliant, successful people, all his prepared answers seemed inadequate. He decided on honesty. Because my sister needs surgery, and this job pays enough to cover it, he said simply. I know I'm not qualified. I know this is crazy, but sometimes desperate situations require desperate measures. Jennifer Walsh raised an eyebrow. That's refreshingly honest, but hardly a qualification for designing complex software systems. Do you even know what a software architect does? Not really, Marcus admitted. But I learn fast, and I work harder than anyone you'll ever meet. I've been supporting myself and my sister since I was 18. I've worked 3 jobs at once when necessary. I don't quit, and I don't give up. Work ethic is admirable, David said, but this position requires specific technical skills you simply don't possess. We need someone who can design scalable systems, optimize algorithms, manage database architectures. Can I ask you something? Marcus interrupted, then immediately regretted his boldness. But Sterling gestured for him to continue. What's the hardest problem your company is trying to solve right now? The 3 technical experts exchanged glances. Sterling leaned forward, intrigued. Why do you ask? Because maybe the reason you can't solve it is that you're all thinking about it the same way. Sometimes an outsider's perspective can see things that experts miss. That's a nice theory, Jennifer said with a condescending smile. But we're dealing with highly complex technical challenges that require deep, specialized knowledge. Try me, Marcus said. Another exchange of glances. Then Sterling spoke. We've been working on an optimization problem for our logistics division. We have a delivery network with thousands of drivers making millions of deliveries across hundreds of cities. The current routing algorithms are inefficient. Drivers waste time and fuel because the system can't account for real-world variables like traffic patterns, weather delays, construction zones, and human behavior. We've thrown our best programmers at it for 2 years with minimal improvement. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking. During his 3 years with City Express, he'd watched firsthand as technological solutions failed to account for human realities. The company's routing software constantly sent drivers to locations at impossible times, failed to account for building access restrictions, and ignored the practical knowledge that experienced drivers had accumulated over years. Then he said, You're trying to solve it like a computer problem, aren't you? Creating algorithms that treat every delivery like a data point in a perfect mathematical model. That's generally how software solutions work, yes, David said dryly. But drivers aren't computers. I've been doing delivery work for 3 years. I know that route optimization isn't just about distance and traffic data. It's about understanding that Mrs. Patterson always takes 10 minutes to answer her door because she's elderly and moves slowly, so you schedule her deliveries when you're ahead of schedule. It's knowing that the downtown office building has a loading dock that's always jammed between noon and 1 p.m., so you hit it at 11:30. It's understanding that human beings have patterns and preferences that don't show up in any algorithm. The room had gone completely silent. Sterling was staring at Marcus with an expression of intense interest. Go on, Sterling said quietly. Your system probably optimizes for the shortest theoretical route, right? But in real delivery work, the shortest route isn't always the fastest or most efficient. Sometimes taking a longer route that avoids certain areas or timing patterns saves more time overall. And it's not just about individual deliveries. It's about understanding the psychological patterns of drivers. Some perform better with challenging routes that keep them engaged. Others prefer predictable patterns that reduce stress. Your algorithm needs to account for human variables, not just mathematical ones. Marcus leaned forward, warming to the subject. At City Express, we had this one driver, Rodriguez, who'd been doing the downtown route for 8 years. The computer would generate his daily schedule, but Rodriguez would always modify it based on things the system couldn't know. Which security guards were friendly and would expedite building access. Which elevators were slowest. Which businesses had hidden loading areas that saved 20 minutes of walking. The company kept trying to force him to follow the computer-generated routes exactly, and their efficiency metrics kept getting worse. Jennifer leaned forward. What happened? Eventually, they let Rodriguez train the new drivers instead of just giving them the computer printouts. Productivity in that sector increased by 30% in 6 months, because they finally recognized that the human knowledge was more valuable than the algorithmic optimization. Crowdsourced algorithm refinement, David murmured, making notes. Using experiential knowledge to supplement mathematical modeling. But the technical implementation, Jennifer began, would be handled by people like you, Marcus said. I'm not claiming I could write the code, but I understand the problem you're trying to solve in a way that someone who's never spent 12 hours a day navigating delivery routes might not. Sterling stood up abruptly, walked to the window, and stared out at the city for several minutes, while everyone else sat in awkward silence. Finally, he turned back to the group. David, Jennifer, could you give me a moment alone with Mr. Thompson? They filed out, leaving Marcus alone with the CEO. Sterling returned to his seat and studied Marcus with those intense green eyes. You know you're not getting the software architect position, he said. Marcus's heart sank, though he'd known this was inevitable. I understand. Thank you for your time. I'm not finished. Sterling smiled. 3 months ago, I created a new position within the company. Chief Innovation Officer for Human-Centered Solutions. The idea was to find someone who could bridge the gap between our technical expertise and real-world implementation challenges, someone who understands problems from the user perspective rather than just the engineering perspective. Marcus blinked, not sure where this was going. We've interviewed dozens of candidates, MBAs from top schools, consultants from major firms, former executives from our competitors. They all had impressive credentials and sophisticated theories about human-centered design, but none of them had actually lived the problems they were proposing to solve. I don't understand. The position pays significantly more than the software architect role you applied for. It would involve working directly with me to identify inefficiencies and innovation opportunities across all our divisions. You'd be traveling to facilities, talking to workers, understanding processes from the ground up, then collaborating with our technical teams to develop solutions that actually work in the real world. Marcus felt dizzy. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you the job you were actually meant to have, even though neither of us knew it when you walked in here. Sterling pulled out his phone. Sarah, could you come back in, please, and bring a contract for the Chief Innovation Officer position? When Sarah returned with David and Jennifer, she was carrying a folder thick with paperwork. Her expression had shifted from bewildered skepticism to professional respect. The starting salary is $180,000, Sterling continued, plus benefits, stock options, and a discretionary bonus structure tied to the measurable impact of your innovations. You'll have a team of analysts and direct access to every department in the company. Marcus tried to process the number. It was more than triple what he'd made in his best year. More than enough for Emma's surgery with money left over to completely change their lives. But I don't have any business experience, he managed to say. You have something more valuable, Sterling replied. You have the perspective of someone who's actually lived the problems we're trying to solve. Most innovation fails because it's created by people who've never experienced the challenges they're addressing. You've been experiencing them for years. David Kumar, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Actually, this makes a lot of sense. Some of our most successful products came from insights that seemed obvious in retrospect, but required someone outside the traditional tech mindset to identify. The delivery optimization problem you just described, Jennifer added, we've been approaching it exactly wrong. We've been so focused on the technical elegance of the solution that we forgot about the human reality of implementation. Sterling turned back to Marcus. There's one condition. You'll need to complete an intensive 6-month training program to understand our business operations, technology capabilities, and corporate culture. You'll be drinking from a fire hose, learning things about business and technology that would normally take years to absorb. Are you prepared for that challenge? Marcus thought about his sister Emma, waiting at home for news about whether her surgery would be possible. He thought about the stack of unpaid bills on his kitchen table. He thought about 3 years of delivering packages to office buildings like this one, wondering what it would be like to work inside instead of just dropping off envelopes in the lobby. I'm prepared, he said. Sterling smiled and extended his hand. Welcome to Quantum Dynamics, Mr. Thompson. I have a feeling you're going to change how we think about solving problems. As they shook hands, Marcus realized that sometimes the most important qualification for a job isn't what you know, it's what you've experienced. And sometimes the best innovations come not from expertise, but from understanding. The contract signing took another hour. Marcus called Emma from the lobby, his voice shaking as he told her about the salary, the insurance coverage, the signing bonus that would cover her surgery immediately. Are you serious? She whispered, and he could hear her crying. Marcus, are you absolutely serious? Dead serious. We're going to get you that surgery. You're going to walk again. I can't believe it. What did you do in there? Marcus looked back up at the building, at the floors of brilliant people working on complex problems. I just told them what I knew. Turns out that was enough. 6 months later, Marcus's first major initiative, the driver feedback optimization system, had increased delivery efficiency by 23% and reduced fuel costs by 15%. The system was being licensed to logistics companies worldwide. His second project, redesigning customer service protocols based on his retail experience, had improved satisfaction ratings by 31%. His third innovation came from an unexpected source, Emma herself. During her recovery from surgery, she'd mentioned how difficult it was for disabled individuals to navigate online systems that weren't designed with accessibility in mind. Marcus had pitched a comprehensive accessibility audit across all of Quantum Dynamics' digital platforms. The resulting improvements not only expanded their customer base by 12%, but also earned the company recognition as a leader in inclusive design. But the real validation came in a company-wide email Sterling sent to celebrate the success. Innovation doesn't require advanced degrees or technical expertise. It requires the courage to see problems differently and the wisdom to listen to people who live with those problems every day. Sometimes the most qualified person for a job is the one who seems least qualified on paper. Marcus printed that email and framed it on his office wall, right next to a photo of his sister Emma walking for the first time since her successful surgery. Some risks, he'd learned, are worth taking, especially when the people willing to take them aren't afraid to admit what they don't know and aren't too proud to learn from anyone willing to teach them. The job he'd applied for would have changed his life. The job he actually got changed his entire understanding of what was possible. A year later, Marcus was invited to speak at a tech conference about innovation through unconventional perspectives. As he stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of brilliant engineers, successful entrepreneurs, and industry leaders, he thought about that day he'd walked into Quantum Dynamics as a desperate delivery driver with no credentials and impossible dreams. The most dangerous phrase in innovation, he told the audience, is "that's how we've always done it." Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from people who don't know enough to understand why something is supposed to be impossible. In the audience, Robert Sterling smiled and nodded, already planning the next unconventional hire.